It's all about understanding the language that it takes to get the message across. And what I say is, if you don't know the language, sometimes it's literal language, other times it's just how you communicate, you got to learn it. If you can't learn it, you got to hire a translator. You have to communicate in a language that they all understand. So we've got a story, we're going where we've never been before, we're encouraging risk-taking, never being bigger in the front line, and communicating to everybody in the organization. Here's my last point, and we'll open it up. So, having these roles I have, you have to kind of keep yourself grounded. I have a wife that does it, 2 sons that do it, but sometimes you need more. So, I told my assistant when I was the chairman and CEO of Pathmark that every board meeting I have, leave me alone. No calls, no interruptions, nothing. I only have a day with the board, and it's pretty important stuff. Okay? So I'm 2 hours into my board meeting one morning, and there's a knock on the door, and Diane walks in. She goes, "Jack's on the phone." I said, "Tell him I'll take a message. Tell him to just take a message and tell him I'll call him later. You know what I just told you." Sorry to the board for the interruption. The board says fine. Then she goes, "Jack's on the phone. He needs to talk to you." Jack was my 80-year-old stepfather. I said, "Diane, just tell him to take a message, or just tell him I'll call him back." She goes, "Excuse me." She goes to the board, "I think it's time for a break." She goes, "Jim needs to take this phone call from his stepfather, and besides, I don't know what you guys were discussing, but I think it's family important." And she looks at me and she goes like this, and she goes like this. Now I'm really mad. The board goes, "Oh, sure. What are you talking about, Jim? Go see what's up with Jack." So I was mad. She walks into my office. She slams the door on me. She goes, "Let me tell you something, big shot. Your stepfather is 80 years old. Maybe, just maybe, you got to see what he has to say." I said, "Yeah, I will, and I want to see you after work." She says, "I want to see you too after work." She didn't leave. She said, "Jack, here he is." She stood right there. I said, "Jack, what is it?" "I'm in the middle of this board meeting." She goes, "Jimmy," he's like hyperventilating. I said, "Jack, are you okay?" He says, "Jimmy," it's like I know he's like salivating everywhere. I said, "Jack, what is it? Is Mom okay?" He goes, "Jimmy, I shot my age today." He was 80, he shot a 78. I said, "What?" I said, "Jack," she goes, Diane says, "Excuse me, Jack, he'll be right with you." She put on hold. She goes, "Let me tell you something." She called me a name that starts with A-H, okay? She goes, "I don't know who you think you are, but why don't you take a minute," and this is the 6th component, honor, courage, and commitment. This is something that really puts the icing on the cake when you're leading people to celebrate the success of others. She goes, "It isn't all about you anymore. Your job is to motivate people. You say you want to make people dance and make the numbers dance." I've been saying this for a long time. She goes, "But it's not working. Talk to Jack, and I still want to see you afterwards." So she did. I did. It was all fine. Now I'm doing a talk in front of 600 people. Wrigley chewing gum, all the salespeople in Florida. My mom's there, Jack's there. I tell them the Jack story. My mother's crying, Jack's crying. I say, "What am I doing?" And afterwards, nobody came up to see me. They all went to see Jack. And to this day, he still gets Wrigley balls, teas, towels, and all this stuff. The power of celebrating the success of others, I can't tell you enough what that does. When you talk about honor, courage, and commitment, it's about others. It's not about you. And one last thing, and I told this to Art today, and he did this today. There's a secret about leadership that I'm going to give you guys the heads up on. Nobody does it anymore because there's iPhones or there's texting or there's, you name it, it's out there. What has died away but can make a comeback if you want it to, it can put you in an unbelievable leadership position with your troops, with your parents, with your professors, with your coaches. It's called a handwritten note. You guys are sitting in a pretty enviable position around the world in what you do, being here at the Naval Academy. Do you know the power that you have in just sending a note to a teacher back where you used to live, or your brother or your sister? It means that you here are in this unbelievable position, but you're taking the time to communicate by writing the handwritten note. It's dead. and we need to bring it back. So, all 6 steps, and I'll close with this. It's not rocket science. But my final story, to really bring this all in. Do you have NPR radio out here? National Public Radio, okay? Everybody's heard it. I just heard it 6 months ago, and there was a big to-do on what does rocket science mean when someone says, it's not rocket science, or it is rocket science. Nobody knew. So they dispatched a reporter to go to NASA, Cape Canaveral. They went to the rocket scientists and said, what does this mean? Rocket science? We don't know. We do it every day. It's easy. Well, when you find something hard, what do you say? Brain surgery? Brain surgery, yeah. The reporter gets into a plane, flies into Baltimore, goes to Johns Hopkins, talks to the best brain surgeons in the world, tells them the story about the rocket scientist, said it was brain surgery. No. We do 2 or 3 brain surgeries a day. It's sensitive. It's kind of, you know, sometimes emotional, but it's not hard. Well, it is. Nuclear physics. She goes to MIT, talks to the nuclear physicist, says what the brain surgeon said and what the rocket scientists said. This is a true story. They say, no, we teach this. We have assistants teach nuclear physics. Well, what do you think is hard? Oh, social science. Dealing with people is the most difficult thing in the whole wide world. I'm telling you. Leadership, coaching, teaching is all about people. As I opened up a talk with 500 PhDs, I said, what is it about getting your PhD that will put you at a disadvantage with the rest of the world? They really got mad at me. But then I got to talk for 2 or 3 hours. Because you got to understand people. So those 6 components, and by the way, I had this little book to put in your pocket. It's a leather-bound book with my 6 components, and I forgot it. But I'm gonna overnight it this week to Art. Well, all of you will get a copy of this because it's just fun stuff. You got to have a story to tell. You got to have a fish story. You got to communicate. Never be bigger. Okay? Celebrate the success of others. Encourage risk-taking. And to me, that's what honor, courage, and commitment is all about. So with that, I'm done, and we've got time for questions and hopefully answers. I'd be more than happy to take any question that one of you young leaders has. Colin, what is it? Christy, I know my group here. I can call on them here. Any questions at all? Yes, sir.
Sir, Bishop Insight Class Aronson. I was wondering if you could illustrate an example of a time that you've had an ethical dilemma when you've been in a leadership position, how you kind of fielded it, handled it.
Did everybody hear the question? How I handled an ethical dilemma. It wasn't necessarily ethical in terms of making numbers dance through fraudulent ways, but we were quarreling with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia over the trademark rights. We could only do what we could do under U.S. law, and in order to make sure that they understood that, I took a team of people into Ethiopia to talk to the Prime Minister to explain why we were trying to do this. And it could have, again, it wasn't necessarily an ethical thing, but it was being portrayed as we were doing a disservice to the farmers in the African regions. And so I wanted to make sure that we got that out first and foremost. And the reason I guess my answer to your question is I just went right after it and went where I'd never been before to talk to the Prime Minister. I can't really think of a time when I've had times when I've had to terminate people for doing things that weren't ethical with regard to maybe stealing from the company or stealing assets, but that's about as close as I can come.
Sir, I think maybe to be more specific, maybe a time when you've had to sacrifice some of the revenues and profits of your company for the welfare of your people or something like that, sir?
Well, okay. It's more of a personal ethical piece. So I was at Starbucks as a CEO. My bonus was based on earnings per share. Everybody else was based on operating earnings. And you could actually increase the earnings per share by taking the necessary cost-cutting initiatives to reach that certain earnings per share. Well, one particular year we made our earnings per share, but we did not make the operating number. It means I was the only one that bonused. And there is no way in the world that I'm going to take a bonus over frontline employees. So I distributed my bonus down to my team, but most of it to the front line, to the store managers, first thing. Second thing is I go into this new company called Haggen. I have to cut half the work staff, I have to call company cars in, I have to sell the airplanes, and I have to ask for pay cuts. I had just signed a contract. I have to take a pay cut too, if I'm going to lead by what I'm asking others to do. It's not all about you anymore as a leader, it's about others, and it's about how you're perceived. So I hope that question. Yes?
You've taken so many jobs as CEO. I was wondering at what point do you realize it's time to change? Like, when do you decide, what makes you decide to switch directions in your career, switch companies?
The question was, why can't you keep a job, Jim? If I put it that way. No, listen. I talked to a class of teachers on the leadership piece today. And I'll be frank with all of you, if I can be honest and share what we said. We talked about, can you tell us, Jim, in the military, everybody is kind of at a certain level and they're going to get promoted after a certain time, and before long they're going to be a sergeant or a colonel or a general, an admiral. Is business just like that as well? And business is that methodical and that plodding, okay? The reason I'm going to give my wife the credit for this, decided to work for Albertsons for 16 years. Sam Walton calls. It's a promotion. It's a new world for me. I'll take it. Got another call from Steve Bird, CEO of Safeway, president of the Eastern region here. I'll take that. 3 years later, here's a CEO job. If you want to progress up at a quicker rate, you've got to do a little bit of getting noticed, taking on tough projects, and taking a little bit of risk-taking. It was never in my nature. I stayed in the same house as a kid growing up. But I saw opportunities out there, and I saw individuals that were running companies that I know I could do a better job of. And so I raised my hand, and off I went. So that was kind of the reason why I did that. Now, I am tired of the day-to-day stuff, and hopefully we'll get, we'll do what's right with this company. We'll get this in great shape, and I might go back to teaching and maybe speaking and doing some board work. So, anything else?
Sure. You mentioned that it's important to give people the opportunity to fail. How do you deal with them if they do fail? Or how do you deal with that?
As the question was, I did talk about giving people the opportunity to fail. How do I deal with it? When you ask people to take calculated risk, you make sure that the risk isn't betting the company. And you actually build into the scenario that they're going to fail. And once they give you the results, whether they failed or not, you learn from those results, whether it's a high five or what can we do better. But as a leader, giving individuals the ability to take risk, you need to know where you're going to go, but you shouldn't govern them other than parameters that they're not going to do anything illegal, immoral, unethical, and then basically let it go for what it is. Because that's the only way that you're going to move something forward or let the individual grow as a leader. But you as a leader, too, should know the parameters of what those risk-taking are. Anybody else? About done with time anyway. Patrick?
Sir, you talked a little bit about your family life. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the difficulties in the moving and that kind of thing that your family was placed under with your various jobs.
The question was the difficulties of moving around for my family. I take it you moved around as well. I said you were born in Guam.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, and look what it did to you. You're an outstanding young man. So my son was in, my older son, gosh, when he went in the 9th grade, he went from New Jersey to Seattle, and he said, I wish I could teleport myself back every weekend because I just hate Seattle. Today he says it's the best movie he's ever made. My younger son, when my older son was up saying, I wish I was back in New Jersey, my younger son was in the 2nd grade, and he was stopping mothers with strollers and saying, you got any kids my age? I'm looking for a friend. So they each handle this in their own way, but at the end of the day, I think it made them a little bit more